that economy. And I don't care if you don't want to be hearing about that. You've got to hear about it.
The economy is not going to rebound with the economic proposals that are in place now. The global situation has created an environment for a financial panic. The financial panic conditions have been in place for quite a while. What Trump's victory's done is just kind of played it off for a little bit, possibly.
There will be a lot of inflation for all prices. At the same time, the economy will be weak. They might call it stagflation. We didn't have a recent depression. It was just a super recession. In the same way with this. They're not going to call it, an inflationary depression, but that's possible. And the worst scenario for that would be things like Zimbabwe and Venezuela.
We have the worst revival of an economy since the Great Depression. And believe me, we're in a bubble right now. And the only thing that looks good is the stock market. But if you raise interest rates even a little bit, that's going to come crashing down. We are in a big, fat, ugly bubble.
U.S. stocks are very expensive. Candidate Trump had it right when he called it a big, fat, ugly bubble. And it's bigger, fatter, and uglier now. And the fact that he's president doesn't change it from a bubble to a bull market. It's still a bubble. The air is going to come out one way or another. Either the U.S. stock market is going to crash or the dollar is going to crash.
It's the biggest bubble I've seen in history. This book, The Sale of a Lifetime, my new book that looks at every bubble in history, looks at all the bubbles around the world. They all look alike. They all grow exponentially. And now we have a bigger stock bubble by far than ever, larger real estate bubbles in many cities and extreme around the world, especially in places like China, London, and Australia. And these bubbles are going to burst. That's all bubbles do, is they build. That's one of the principles in this book. The second thing is, when they crash, half the crash will come in the first 3 months. When the smart money finally realizes this bubble's over, because they're playing it with leverage, they get out really quick.
You're going to see bankruptcies. The debt is much higher all over the world now, Colin, than it was 8 years ago. Even China now has a lot of debt, which it did not have in 2008. No, I'm afraid you're going to see a lot of problems. Everybody's debt has gone through the roof. Money has been printed. Be worried.
We must honestly acknowledge the circumstances we inherited. 94 million Americans are out of the labor force. Over 43 million people are now living in poverty, and over 43 million Americans are on food stamps. More than 1 in 5 people in their prime working years are not working. We have the worst financial recovery in 65 years. In the last 8 years, the past administration has put on more new debt than nearly all of the other presidents combined.
Deal with this reality. Deal with it now. The sooner you deal with it, the easier it'll be to come out the other side. If you want to fight an entire massive global war where hundreds of millions, if not billions of people die in order to learn this lesson, then by God, that's what's going to happen. But you could nip that in the bud, come to this reality now, and assuage all of that. The choice is yours.
What lies ahead for the economy this year? Will the economy finally collapse as predicted by many, or will the early positive signs in the stock markets around the world continue and global economy will flourish? I've taken a lot of heat for being gloomy and for fear-mongering lately when I've said that President-elect inheriting a mess of epic proportions and that we may still be in a rough financial ride. While I do think that Trump is a far better choice than Hillary Clinton ever could be, when a situation has been declining as long as ours has, it would take an absolute miracle to turn it around without some pain. And it turns out I'm not alone in my concern about the worst for our economic situation during the upcoming year. Here's what 12 prominent financial experts are predicting. Lawrence Yun, is the chief economist at the National Association of Realtors. The budget of many prospective buyers last month was dealt an abrupt hit by the quick ascension of rates immediately after the election. Already faced with climbing home prices and minimal listings in the affordable price range, fewer home shoppers in most of the country were successfully able to sign a contract. Gerald Silent is a trends forecaster who has a long history of accuracy. You can find his work at trendsresearch.com. He predicts we're forecasting the economy is not going to rebound with the economic proposals that are in place now. The global situation has created an environment for financial panic. The financial panic conditions have been in place for quite a while. What Trump's victory has done is played it off for a little bit, possibly, but on the negative side, you still have the debt and interest rates going up and the debt that has to be paid. On gold, we believe right now is near rock bottom.
The economy is not going to rebound with the economic proposals that are in place now. The global situation has created an environment for financial panic. The financial panic conditions have been in place for quite a while. What Trump's victory's done is just kind of played it off for a little bit, possibly. But again, on the negative side, with the interest rates going up and the debt that has to be paid. And so the gold, we believe right now, is near its bottom.
James Dale Davidson. He's the economist who correctly predicted the collapse of 1999 and 2007. There are three economic indicators screaming sell. They don't imply that a 50% collapse is looming. It's already at our doorstep.
They don't want you to know the truth. They don't want you to know that this economic recovery is a statistical illusion, that it is fueled by debt, by the printing of trillions of dollars and keeping interest rates at historic lows. This is a game of let's pretend that you are not meant to win. If everyone found out, the economic collapse will unwind. The powers that be would rather pretend that this economic monster isn't staring them in the face and breathing down their neck. The collapse is looming.
Mark Faber is an investment advisor and fund manager. He is the publisher of Gloom Boom and Doom Report newsletter and is the director of Mark Faber Limited.
Unless you have a very bearish view about the US dollar, which eventually the dollar will collapse one day.
Faber was also quoted in an article on the Sovereign Investor. Investors are on the Titanic and stocks are about to endure a gut-wrenching drop that would rival the greatest crashes in stock market history. Harry Dent, Harvard economist, predicts the safe haven of gold will be wiped out during 2017, while many economists will argue that gold is not in a bubble and insist it will soar to $2,000, $5,000 and even $10,000. My research has said otherwise. I've never been more certain of anything in over 30 years of economic forecasting.
The dollar going up is bad for gold. Deflation instead of inflation is bad for gold. And gold's been going down since 2013 because that's when the Japanese really stepped up the QE wars and inflation fell anyway and the gold bugs finally had to throw in the towel. They've been waiting for rising inflation and even hyperinflation, and you're not going to get it because the fundamental trend, debt deleveraging, financial asset bubble leveraging, destroying money and credit, which is deflationary. Gold correlates, whether you go back hundreds of years or the last decades, it correlates incredibly well with inflation. That's it. And it correlates with the 30-year commodity cycle that peaked between 2008 and 2011. Those are the two things it correlates. It's not a deflation hedge, and it's not even a crisis hedge, because our worst crisis that we've seen in a long time was 2008 and 9, and gold went running to mommy. It dropped 33%, and silver dropped 50% in the second half of 2008. It was the US dollar and the highest quality sovereign and corporate bonds that were the safe haven. That's what I'm telling people to go now. Wait this out, and when bubbles crash, then you can start buying commodities.
Anne Rutledge is a fixed income analyst who is a regular writer for Forbes. She analyses economic patterns and feels the slide has been underway since 2013. Last year, she wrote, "So if you ask me whether we are going to have another global financial crisis in 2017, I would say the odds are good. This one probably started in 2013 and by now is well underway." Peter Costa, president of Empire Executions, has taken the unprecedented step of pulling out of the markets, believing that they are overpriced and a major correction is on the way. In an interview, he said, "I think that a lot of these stocks, big cap, small cap, they all got ahead of themselves. And I think that there will be a correction to bring them back to some sort of normalization in pricing. And once it gets back there, I'll be back in the market."
Peter Costa, we've talked the last several times we've spoken with you about how you got out of the market here. So do you anticipate getting back in 2017? What are you going to wait for there?
Oh, absolutely. I think, Bill, what I'm looking for is after the first couple of weeks of trading next year and seeing how the earnings start coming in. And I think that, you know what, like I've said before, that I think that a lot of these stocks, big cap, small cap, they all got ahead of themselves. And I think that there will be a correction to bring them back to like some sort of normalization in pricing. And once it gets back there, I'll be back in the market.
Chris Martison, an economic researcher, wrote, "GDP growth is very unlikely to support the rate of credit expansion that the Federal Reserve wants, or more accurately, needs. And what will happen if it indeed doesn't? A lot of painful, awful things. But central among them is a currency crisis. Amidst the ensuing unpleasantness will be an awakening within today's hyper-financialized markets to the huge imbalance now existing between paper claims and ownership of real things. A massive wealth transfer from those with paper wealth, stocks, bonds, dollars, to those owing tangible assets, the productive value of which can't easily be inflated away, will occur, and quickly too." Michael Covell, a teacher of trend following and financial strategy, thinks the collapse will start in Europe and then spread to the rest of the world. He explains why in great detail, calling it chillingly the next Lehman moment. Deutsche Bank has started leverage of 40 times. Leverage is the proportion of debts that a bank has compared with the equity capital. That means Deutsche has 40 times more debt than equity capital. Keep in mind that Lehman Brothers was only 31 times leveraged when it imploded in 2008 and sparked the worst global financial crisis since the Great Depression. France's clear disconnect with the EU can't be overrated. The EU survived Brexit, but a French divorce from the EU would be cataclysmic, both financially and politically. It would mark the official end of the EU. Bank runs would spread as customers sought the safety of cash well before actual earth-shattering event took place. It would start in French banks, and the knock-on effects would spread to other European banks that have relationships with French banks. This would create a huge decline in confidence, leading to a European-wide decline in bank lending. And these bank runs would spread into a more widespread financial crisis in the global financial sector. Non-Eurozone financial institutions in the US and Asia would come under immense pressure because they too have heavy exposure to European banks. Alessandro Lombardi, a former global investment banking analyst, wrote, "Emerging markets are the soft underbelly of the global economy. Many analysts expect the election of Donald Trump to the White House will change the United States' economic and monetary policies. This could worsen conditions for businesses in emerging markets that are financed in US dollars. The result might be a global economic collapse in 2017. Jim Rogers, who founded the Quantum Fund with George Soros, is on the record as saying a $68 trillion biblical collapse is poised to wipe out millions of Americans.
It's going to be worse than 2008, though. You're going to see bankruptcies. The debt is much higher all over the world now, Colin, than it was 8 years ago. Even China now has a lot of debt, which it did not have in 2008. No, I'm afraid you're going to see a lot of problems. Everybody's debt has gone through the roof. Money has been printed. be worried. The central bank in America is going to say, don't worry, we will save you after they get enough complaints. And then they're going to print more money and try to drive interest rates even lower. But that's going to make things worse, Colin. The only solution is to take the pain, to realize we've made horrible mistakes, let some people go bankrupt, and start over. That's the only way history ever solves problems like this. You cannot just kick the can down the road.
Andrew Smithers, an economist with an unsettling history of being prophetic, was quoted in the same article. US stocks are now about 80% overhauled. Smithers backs up his predictions using a ratio which proves that the only time in history stocks were this risky was 1929 and 1999. And we all know what happened next. Stocks fell by 89% and 50% respectively. What do you think? Personally, I'm prepping harder than ever before. I've spent too much time researching the collapse of Venezuela to sit idly by and let my family face the same hunger and desperation that is rampant there. Right now, a few rocks are falling, warning of an imminent disaster. But if you aren't prepped, you still have time. If you wait until an avalanche begins, it will be unstoppable. You will have waited too long. My suggestions are: reduce your expenses to the bone. The less monthly overhead you have, the longer you can live on your savings. Start building an emergency fund. The rainy day may be here sooner than you think. Stockpile food, OTC medications, and other necessities. Get prepared to protect your family when the economy declines. Crime increases. We've been in decline for years. Our national debt has reached monstrous proportions. Even if Trump is able to pull off a miracle and turn things around, there will have to be drastic cuts for this to happen, painful ones. People will suffer. And I'll do everything I can to protect my family before that happens.
Solutions. Don't bother moving. You cannot escape this. This is global. There's nowhere to run. Well, I'm going to go to Australia, and I'm going to go to New Zealand. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Really? Talk to Trevor Loudon about that. Have Trevor Loudon explain to you how China is positioning to annex Australia and New Zealand after the fall of the United States. Talk to him about that. I mean, you know, decades ago, they'd love to have you, but today, there's nowhere to run. This is the United States. For all of its flaws, for all of its many flaws, this is the last bulwark of defense against the forces of evil running rampant all over this country. This is it. If the United States falls, all of humanity is going to go into a dark age. There's nowhere to run. This isn't like World War II where the people in Germany could come to the United States or come to Canada. There's nothing like that here. You have to stand and fight. And what part of that, a big part of that, and those tactics is getting pre-positioned. You know that the battle is coming. You know that the war is upon us. Get yourself positioned. Allocate as much wealth as possible into physical commodities. This includes land, precious metals, livestock, food, water, and fuel. Do it now. Because 1 second after, it'll be too late. You have to do it now. And so we'll end with the question, Quo Vadis? Where are you going? The answer is, I'm going to Rome to be crucified. It's time. Some people have to. Not all of you have to do that, but some of us are called. Some of us have to stand and fight against this. And how can it not work out well? Because who's going with us? Who was crucified first, and who is going to be crucified with us? It's our Lord. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Like I said, the IRS has already started levying my bank accounts. They will levy all of my bank accounts. They will levy my personal property. I look forward to it. I look forward to it. Quo Vadis, where am I going? I'm going to Rome to be crucified. And you know, it worked out okay for Peter. I think they built a little old church over his grave, and it worked out okay. But somebody has to do this. Some of you are going to have to do this. Some of you are going to have to stand. You have to stand and you have to fight the forces of evil, and now is that time. This is as big of a war, this is as big of a battle as has ever been on this planet in human terms. You can't run away, you can't hide. Quo vadis, where are you going?
Expensive. Candidate Trump had it right when he called it a big, fat, ugly bubble, and it's bigger, fatter, and uglier now. And the fact that he's president doesn't change it from a bubble to a bull market. It's still a bubble. The air is going to come out one way or another. Either the U.S. stock market is going to crash or the dollar is going to crash.
It's the biggest bubble I've seen in history. This book, The Sale of a Lifetime, my new book that looks at every bubble in history, looks at all the bubbles around the world. They all look alike. They all grow exponentially, and now we have a bigger stock bubble by far than ever, larger real estate bubbles in many cities, and extreme around the world, especially in places like China, London, and Australia. And these bubbles are going to burst. That's all bubbles do, is they build. That's one of the principles in this book. The second thing is, when they crash, half the crash will come in the first 3 months.
It's possible, and the worst scenario for that would be things like Zimbabwe and Venezuela.
We have the worst revival of an economy since the Great Depression. And believe me, we're in a bubble right now. And the only thing that looks good is the stock market. But if you raise interest rates even a little bit, that's going to come crashing down. We are in a big, fat, ugly bubble.
U.S. stocks are very
victory's done is just kind of played it off for a little bit, possibly.
There will be a lot of inflation for all prices. At the same time, the economy will be weak. They might call it stagflation. We didn't have a recent depression. It was just a super recession. In the same way with this. They're not going to call it, an inflationary depression. But that's
that economy. And I don't care if you don't want to be hearing about that. You've got to hear about it.
The economy is not going to rebound with the economic proposals that are in place now. The global situation has created an environment for financial panic. The financial panic conditions have been in place for quite a while. What Trump's